Thank you, everybody, for joining our speaker series 2025. In fact, this is our first talk for 2025, and I think it's going to be great. I'm really excited. Sometimes we hear about things going on in other parts of the country or in other parts of the continent. We had a talk that included someone from the US in the fall, but today's a real treat because we're going to be actually hearing about things in Scotland. So we have two speakers today, Natasha Spassiani and Aaron Hume. And as if you're joining late, make sure your chat box is on so you can see the things that are being typed in the chat as well as hearing the things that are spoken. And I'm going to turn things over to them and they're going to introduce themselves. And I just want to say that we're going to save some time for questions and discussion at the end. So write things down, get ready. And I'm really excited to learn from our colleagues in Scotland and about their research and how it's relevant to us here. So take it away.
Okay, thanks everyone. And I apologize if you thought you were going to hear some Scottish accents today. I'm actually from Toronto, so you'll hear another Canadian accent, and you'll have Aaron as well. So thanks for having us. So today's presentation is called From Social Isolation to Social Inclusion, Empowering Adults with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities through Inclusive Health Research and Digital Inclusion. So just a little about myself and Aaron before we start. I'm an associate professor here at Edinburgh Napier University, and a lot of my research looks at how we can do inclusive research with people with intellectual disabilities in the healthcare context and also meaningful community participation. And Aaron.
Hello to those who don't know me. My name is Aaron Hume. I am a disabled rights campaigner. I am passionate about making things fair and accessible for all. I work on a number of projects with SCLD, Edinburgh Napier University, and SLDO, which is part of the University of Glasgow. I am also a health and social care student at West Lothian College.
Okay, so today's talk will be about how we can look at the importance of inclusive health research for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We'll look at some core principles of inclusive research, how inclusive research can be an empowering experience for adults with intellectual disabilities, and then we'll provide a case study example of one of the inclusive co-produced projects that Aaron and I have worked on together. And just a side note that sometimes Aaron and I will use people with learning disabilities, but that's what we use here in the UK, but that means people with intellectual or developmental disabilities as well. So Aaron and I were trying hard to keep it to people with ID, but we keep slipping.
The learning objectives for today's talk are to better understand how adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities can engage in inclusive health research, to critically reflect on the benefits of including inclusive research and clinical practice, to improve the quality of care being provided to adults with IDD, to gain insight into the importance of digital inclusion for the health and social well-being of adults with IDD.
So just some really quick background about societal views and people with disabilities. So typically people with disabilities are isolated from their communities. They kind of live on the fringes of the communities, really alone and dependent on other people. So what we're trying to do is get people more included in their communities through doing inclusive research. And disabled people do experience a lot of oppression, but it's also important to recognize that there's a hierarchy of disability even within the disability community, where people with physical and visual disabilities are kind of at the top of this hierarchy, and people with intellectual disabilities are at the bottom. And you'll often see that other disability groups will want to exclude themselves from people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And you'll see this in everyday talk and everyday communication, where we'll say stuff like, oh, you're an idiot, or that's stupid, let's not do that. You know, words like dumb, handicap, and all of these words used to be terms that we used to call people with learning disabilities or learning intellectual disabilities. You'll also see the difference between Paralympic athletes and Special Olympic athletes, where Paralympic athletes will want to dissociate themselves from Special Olympic athletes, and they'll say, you know, we're real athletes, we actually compete, you know, we have first place, second place, etc. Where they'll say Special Olympic athletes aren't real athletes, they're just doing that for fun, which we know isn't correct. You'll see distancing of disability groups from people with IDD. So typically physical disabilities, people who are have sensory disabilities as well, will distance themselves from the ID community. And this has also led to people with IDD also wanting to distance themselves from their peers, so they're not lumped into this false narrative about what people with learning disabilities are capable of.
Disability is not a bad word. It is our identity, and we should be proud of who we are. People with disabilities should have the opportunity to share their own stories and outlook on life. It is the responsibility of the community, including universities, to meaningfully include people with IDD to better inform clinical practice and research. By doing this, healthcare, government policies and guidelines can be meeting the real needs of the disability community. Nothing about us without us.
Woohoo.
So inclusive research in people with IDD. So the CRPD states that people with disabilities should be included in the research that involves them. But historically, we know that for the learning disability community, we usually do research on people with learning disabilities rather than with them. And but thankfully, with the disability advocacy movements, they have challenged these stereotypes that we need to have the voices of people with learning disabilities included in research in a meaningful way. And this can ensure that they're able to, be a part of education, employment, et cetera, et cetera. And typically, universities are seen as places where, you need to be intellectual, you need to have critical thought, and those are typical characteristics that are associated with people with learning disabilities. But we know that that's not true. So having people involved in research happening in academic settings is a great platform to break down these stereotypes, to really showcase what people with learning disabilities can do. And Aaron's agreeing with me. So Aaron and myself, along with some other colleagues, wrote a paper on how we do our inclusive research as a group. And it's a critical reflection where we all spoke about our experience with doing inclusive research. And part of the co-authors are part of the team. We had four people, Aaron, Andrew, Jody, and Tony, who were citizen researchers who wrote about their experience in being involved in inclusive research. My own personal experience as an academic. Theo was an undergraduate student who wanted to get involved in research in people with learning disabilities. So he's part of our team as well. Anna is our research assistant. And then Moitz is the director of a grassroots disability organization that we work really closely with, and her perspective as well. So it's a really nice paper to show how true partnership and collaboration can happen through inclusive research principles. Aaron's put up the kind of barcode if anyone's interested, or also happy to share afterwards if people are interested to have the paper. But the next slide is going to be Aaron's reflection that's part of the paper.
I will now read to you my critical reflection that is in the published paper, to share with you my experience as being a citizen researcher and co-lecturer. My journey with the university started a few years ago when I had an email from Natasha looking for lecturers with lived experiences to help support the nursing class she was teaching. It was such a great experience that it led to me teaching on 3 other courses. This opportunity opened my eyes to teaching and university life. After this experience, I applied to a health and social care program at college because Natasha's opportunity to co-teach have me the confidence to go to college and learn more about health and social care. I did not know that I was interested in this area until I started co-teaching nursing students at the university. Since then, I have been a paid researcher on projects. People at the university know me by name, and the work that I helped create. I think this work is so important to be a part of because it is not every day that you have the opportunity to come in and do research without needing a degree. For so many years, researchers have been doing research on people with disabilities as subjects. But now, we are creating a meaningful and impactful research through our own lens. Being a part of the university and doing research has helped me build more relationships in the community and at other universities, as it proved to them I already have the skills needed, and be a valued member of the team. Because of my work with the university, the Royal College of Nursing Foundation invited me down to London to be a panelist at their annual lecture event. The theme was about making sure we are supporting learning disability nursing. It was a great experience to be a panelist where I was able to share my experience and knowledge about such an important topic.
So from the paper as well, when we were writing the paper, the citizen researchers suggested that they wanted to do a list of recommendations that universities could follow as kind of like a rough template or guideline if they were thinking about doing inclusive research. So from there, they wanted to develop two lists. So they developed a list of key recommendations for universities, but also a list of key recommendations for people with learning disabilities who want to get involved in inclusive research. So we'll go over really quickly the two lists. So provide a supportive environment where the voices of people with IDD are being heard. It's the responsibility of the university staff to ensure the working environment is inclusive and welcoming for people with IDD. So what we mean here is that a lot of, people that we were working with were saying, I can't, having two back-to-back focus groups and leading those it's really hard for me. I've got to do a lot of masking and I get really, really tired. So can we just do one focus group a day? Or actually, if I do a focus group and I'm leading that, I'm actually going to need 2 days to recover from that because I'm just so exhausted by that. So keeping that in mind when you're working together to say, what works best for them. Creating opportunities for people with IDD in university settings and being creative and thinking outside the box. So not just thinking about how can they collect data, how can we have people with IDD help analyze and write papers, but also what are their own skills that they're bringing that they can actually include and we can use and take advantage of in our own research projects. So we had someone who was really interested in drawing, so we made him an illustrator on some of our outputs. And we had someone else who was interested in being a graphic designer, so she was the graphic designer on our outputs as well, which was really nice. And so they got to have, learn about how to be a researcher, but also got to do what they love to do as well, which was quite nice. And provide proper education and training for how to do research or how to be an effective teacher. So not just assume we've gotten we've gotten people with lived experiences on our team and now we just magically they'll know how to be researchers or how to educate people. But we know we go through tons of training to be in the positions that we're in, and we have to treat people with ID with the same level of respect and expectation as well. And it actually helps them be better researchers, and it helps the overall team as well to be more effective.
Key recommendations for universities to make research and teaching opportunities inclusive for people with IDD. Educate and train researchers on how to do inclusive research so that they can understand how to make research environments inclusive to the needs of people with intellectual disabilities. Preparation is key to success. Make sure to plan for extra time. Having a strong partnership between the university and disability grassroots organizations can strengthen the success of people with IDD working at universities. Researchers must be open to adapting research plans. Being too rigid in your plan can prevent meaningful inclusion for people with intellectual disabilities. Universities must offer paid employment opportunities for people with intellectual disabilities. For this to happen, HR policies and procedures need to be accessible.
Okay, so our second list of recommendations was for people with learning disabilities wanted other people with learning disabilities to know when working at a university. So one of the big things was free labor isn't okay. So be proactive and advocating for yourself and, holding the researchers or academics or whoever you're working with accountable to help you find, pay some paid income somewhere. So whether it be from research grants or maybe some department funding or just being creative in that sense. Each person is different, so a rigid work pattern might not be suitable for everyone. So again, being flexible and being okay to advocate for that. Your perspective is just as equal. So people with IDD often have perspectives that others rarely get a chance to hear. So this is now an opportunity to have your voice heard. And don't be afraid to speak up and have your voice heard in university settings. If given the chance, use it to speak up.
Key recommendations for people with IDD to know about working at a university. The opportunity to get involved in research and teaching helps with personal and professional growth. It may be scary at the start, but give it a try. Know your human rights. If you feel discriminated against, speak up and tell someone. We should not be a label. Your time, skills and commitment to the work should be valued. You do not need a university degree to work at a university. Do not let this stop you. Be open to feedback. It will help you develop your skills. Carers and guardians support people with IDD to take part in university opportunities.
Is it dropping out for anyone?
It's sounding pretty clear over here in Canada,
Okay.
Natasha.
It's probably me. Sorry, Aaron. Okay, so now we'll talk really briefly about our case study that we did. So this was a digital inclusion project that we worked on. Aaron, can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So we published a paper on digital inclusion. It was a co-produced paper that, can we go to the next slide, Aaron? Sorry. So these are the people who were involved, and this was our team. So we had Aaron, Andrew, and Stefan, who were citizen researchers, part of the project. And then we had Moitza, who was the director of Get Together, which is the grassroots disability organization that we work closely with. And Claire was also a coordinator at the organization. And Moitza and Claire reached out to me and said, you know, there was during lockdown, and Get Together is a community organization that looks at helping and supporting people with learning disabilities to be involved in their community and building meaningful relationships, friendships. So a lot of their work that they do is out in the community, creating opportunities for people to get together. Once the lockdown happened for COVID, that really shifted how they could serve the community that they were trying to serve with their organization. So they had to shift to online. So this was a huge feat, but they did it. They trained their membership to come online to Facebook and Zooms, and that's where they had their social gatherings. So Moitza and Claire were like, we're doing a lot of great work. How can we capture this so that we can get the news out there for other organizations to maybe look at and use what we're doing as a template, because we know that digital inclusion is so important, but really, really hard for this population. So from that, the 6 of us got together. Go ahead.
During the COVID-19 pandemic, Get Together moved online and saw that lots of members came to online events. Members found connecting online really helpful. Members were really actively involved. We wanted to share our learning so it would benefit others.
So how did we do the research? So this was one of the first collaborations that we all did together. So we created our working group. We thought about, they put out a call to say who was interested. So Stefan, Aaron, Andrew came forward and said they'd be keen to be involved in the research project. So we collected our data. They collected attendance numbers on Facebook and Zoom events. We collected interviews, some transcript data from the events as well. Then we looked at the data to see, what it was telling us. And all of this time took a really long time. So a bit longer than right, Aaron? A very, very long time. Sometimes it became 1 year. It became painful sometimes with how long it was taking. But we looked at all the data. We made sure that it made sense to us. We made sure that it would make sense to people out there who are going to use the data to help benefit themselves. And then we wrote the paper that we published about the findings of our project. So we found that adults with IDD were able to meaningfully participate online and felt socially connected through their computer screen. So this was really, really big. And we found four main findings, which was active leadership. So people with learning disabilities were leading their own online events. So they were developing what they wanted their online event to be. They were organizing it, they were advertising it, and then they were leading their events online. So which was huge to see people with learning disabilities taking the shift to lead these, not only be engaged online, but also designing and leading their own events. Mental well-being was reported. People were saying that, you know, if they didn't have this online community during lockdown, their mental health would have deteriorated a lot, but actually being connected online helped them stay in a nice positive state during lockdown, which people really, really valued. People talked about technology and digital inclusion, how at the start of lockdown, they had, you know, many people didn't have an idea on how to use Zoom or how to use their tablet or their computer. But through the use and support from Get Together, people actually learned quite well how to use Zoom and Facebook, which was fantastic. And I was actually on mat leave when lockdown was happening. So when I came back, I didn't know anything about Teams and Zoom, but it was Aaron and Andrew and Stefan who actually taught me how to use Zoom. So that was really nice to see how the system was actually working. It was really, really great. And safety, people said that they actually felt safer to engage online than in person. So people who had maybe anxiety to go to in-person events and maybe didn't partake in get-together events because of that, they actually felt that being online was a nice breakthrough to work through their own social anxiety. And then after that, they started hanging out in person once people were allowed to do so.
Some common barriers to being digitally included are not having access to the internet, not having access to a computer, phone or tablet, not knowing how to use a computer, phone or tablet, not knowing how to use online platforms like Zoom or Facebook, not having support to learn how to use electronic software, not being allowed to use electronics or go online. Some common supports to being digitally included are having access to the internet, having access to a computer, phone or tablet, knowing how to use a computer, phone or tablet, knowing how to use online platforms like Zoom or Facebook, having support to learn how to use electronics or online software.
So how digital inclusion can support new opportunities for people with IDD. So from our study, we found that we saw a large increase of active participation online with more people attending events. So before COVID, when in-person face-to-face meetings were happening in the community, they were averaging about 10 people per event. Whereas when they were doing online events, they were averaging 20 people per online event. So they did see quite an increase. Members reported increased self-determination and personal growth. So, but when members were seeing other people with learning disabilities leading events, that actually empowered them to want to lead their own events as well. And they would reach out to Moit St. Clair and be like, you know, I have this idea. Can I, you know, also lead my own event, which was really nice to see. And members took an active leadership role and felt that the organization became a community. So they actually felt that after this whole kind of transition to online, they really felt the organization actually felt really close because of the active involvement of so many different other members. And because they then did go online, they actually had some people from up north in Scotland. So we're central belt. But people up north who are very isolated, were able to then have connection and build friendships as well. So that was something that was a nice outcome to what they were doing.
Important findings from our study included adults with learning disabilities are capable of a lot more than society allows them to show. Being online has allowed Get Together to reach a wider group of people, including people who are more vulnerable. Online events and activities take away some of the risks or unknown factors that come from being in the community, and it allows people to take smaller steps outside of their comfort zone. Important findings from our study were When you see someone that you relate to, challenging themselves, and taking on leadership roles, it impacts what you think is possible for yourself. Regular online connections with others, particularly those with whom you have shared experiences, are meaningful and important for mental well-being. The grassroots organization was able to successfully provide leadership roles for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities using online platforms. Being digitally included provided me with an exciting opportunity. Being digitally connected meant that more opportunities were available to me. I was able to take part in research meetings over Zoom, and the whole paper was written via online meetings. The whole experience was awesome from start to finish. Without being digitally connected, never in a million years would I have had the opportunity to co-write a research paper, especially at the young age of 20.
Okay, so for our last slide, just kind of summing everything up together that we've talked about. So we know that best clinical practice is informed by research. So therefore, it's imperative that we have the voices of people with learning disabilities involved in that research that ultimately will inform clinical practice at the end of the day. And it can show that people with IDD are able to work if given the opportunity to learn and develop the skills that they need, that they can not only work in university settings, but also out in other areas in the community, which is fantastic. So if we can use university settings to help people build their CVs so then they can then go out and get, jobs that they're really excited about, that's a fantastic outcome. And it's important that the ID community does not feel left behind, especially in regards to digital inclusion. And we know that we're seeing the shift of healthcare becoming more digital, having online platforms and interfaces. So we really do have a responsibility to educate people with learning disabilities on how to use these interfaces so that they're not left behind as healthcare moves forward in maybe a more digital online way.
Thank you for listening to our talk. It has been Natasha and I's pleasure to talk to you all. This is another fine example of being digitally connected. I can now tick off my first Zoom meeting in Canada. What a great experience. Does anyone have any questions they would like to ask?
Well, congratulations for your first international meeting, Aaron. And the price was right too, right? No jet lag. And a lot of people in Canada got to hear about your really impressive work. Both of you, Natasha and Aaron, thank you so much. I think the ideas you put forward really resonated. We also experienced that same sudden, what the heck are we doing, crisis of COVID. And I think it forced innovation, didn't it? But some things I feel like some things we can relate to, and we did also in the same way, but some things I think we didn't go as far in doing. So I know, like for me, for example, I don't know if we really we didn't have things that people with we started to a little bit later. But I'm thinking, yeah, about how much leadership we gave people as opposed to partnering. How much of the reins people with lived experience of disability had, and also the partnership with the community organizations piece is really interesting. I think we work in a hospital, but it'd be interesting to hear from people about partnerships with organizations that were self-advocacy organizations and what we did. So I'm looking at your comment, Aaron. To be honest, COVID has been the best ever for me because it opened the doors to a whole world. That's so interesting.
So Aaron and I met during COVID as well. And I think that's kind of where his kind of career has started now since COVID. He's now going to college. He's just gone into, so can you tell us, Aaron? I don't want to speak for you. You speak for yourself.
Wow.
So then how it works here is that he'll do 2 years at a college and then finish off the
Oh,
1 year college, 2 years university,
oh,
and he'll end up with a university degree,
It's amazing.
2 or 3 years.
So taking longer, and then also the accommodation of doing it partly initially at a college instead of going to the big university. Yeah. It's interesting to think about how we do those things in terms of accommodations and supports in Canada. I'm less familiar with it myself, but other people might have comments. I don't want to hog the question answer period. I'm seeing a lot of people really appreciating what was presented, but if people want to raise their virtual hands, maybe we can ask some questions or give some feedback. This was really fabulous to learn about what you did and also how you put pen to paper, literally, right? And you helped other people appreciate what you learned. So instead of just doing it yourselves, you also said there's big lessons here that other people can gain from. So does anyone have any questions or comments? Please raise your hands. So I see Dejana. I hope I said your name right.
Yes, hi. It's Diana. It's always weird. It's the English name, but the spelling is in a different language. It's Diana. Thank you, Yona. Thank you, Natasha and Aaron, very much. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Great. So I'm just gonna wonder, you mentioned some of the existing kind of difficulties before COVID in terms of anxiety, you know, maybe not being digitally included and so on for people with intellectual disabilities. But I also wonder, is the online kind of connecting and ability to connect digitally, does that also take away the stress or burden of the caregivers? Like, was it that the caregivers had to, did that factor in? I'm also curious about Aaron's perspective. So is that also the factor that kind of pushed more people online and being able to connect?
Aaron, are you okay for me to talk while you type? Yeah. Okay. So, so there were caregivers and support staff. There was that tension for some. So a lot of the people that were part of the study, their caregivers and support staff were quite eager to get people online because they knew that that was going to be their source of connection for the person that they cared for. And even that came with its difficulties with people maybe not knowing how to use Zoom or Facebook and whatnot. But Get Together was actually really good at helping to train people to do that. But on the other end, we did have some people whose carers were quite nervous about them coming online and taking part in online events because they are more vulnerable. Maybe they've gotten into a bit of trouble in the past with being online. So again, I think it was just that reassurance that it is a safe place, that Get Together was monitoring people at the event. So it's not like anyone could have come to the events. It had to be membership, people part of the membership were allowed in the events, and they would monitor that. So if anyone, if there was any bullying or anything inappropriate going on, that person would be asked to leave and not come back. So there was that sense of safety that was still around. There was actually one individual who was quite anxious about going out into the community before, but little by little coming to the events, you didn't have to say anything. It was okay just to sit there and watch other people engage. And then after that, I was like, well, I'm kind of feeling a bit more confident. I'm feeling a bit more empowered. I'm going to engage in the chat function, or I'm going to engage with a little icon, like a smiley face or a heart. And then that led to her leading her own event. So it's just little by little steps, I think, in building that safety and self-confidence, which was really nice to see. Aaron, are you okay if I read your reply? So Aaron says, yes, I think it put a place of being support out and about, but find members built better friendships compared to being in person. So you can really know the person a lot better and you can chat. Yeah, so a lot of people found that maybe they were a bit nervous in person to go up and start chatting with people, but a bit less intimidating online to chat with people. So building that friendship online, and now that's translated out to the community where now people are hanging out in person, and it's not intimidating because they have that friendship that they've built online. Does that summarize it right, Aaron?
Thank you so much. I really understand it better now. Thanks for explaining, Aaron. And I have a kind of follow-up question. Right now, you mentioned you're going to college and then you're going to continue at the University of Napier. Is that a combination of virtual and in-person lessons, or is it in-person, or how does that work for you?
Am I okay to read?
Mm.
It's all in person, but not sure how uni is going to work. That's my task after the summer hitting all the open days.
Thank you.
You got more to say, Aaron? It's great benefits working online. Without classes, I can meet my student worker, student support worker,
Yeah.
to help me manage my coursework.
No. Yeah.
Your spell, so do they help with your spelling and grammar?
Uh.
Thank you. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, and I see Avra and Yanni have questions. Maybe Avra and then Yanni.
Thanks. I see Aaron's already called on me, so I appreciate that. So I've been really interested to hear about the value of virtual care, because we've heard a lot of similar things here, that it opened all of these doors for people that we didn't even realize were closed or that could be open. So like COVID was really, it's strange to say, but as you're saying, Aaron, COVID was really a gift in some ways in terms of how it's expanded virtual ways of interacting. And from my lens, I think about how we access healthcare, but also how we interact with each other. And I think now that COVID is not over, but maybe that we've shifted into a new phase of life where in-person is more of an option again. One thing I know we've struggled with in our clinical program here and other people is what should be in person and what should be virtual. What do we still do virtual? Are there times in which in-person has value? So I'm curious if you have any thoughts, or if your teams that you've worked with have any thoughts on that.
So Aaron hosted a few murder mystery events, which worked really well. And that was one of the activities that Get Together put on, which was quite interactive. So that was really great. And it still works. Yeah, so we can still do events online and in person. And one of the things that Aaron and I and some other people have been talking about it, and some other learning disability nurses that work at the hospitals, we've had conversations of like Avra was saying, when is it in person? When do we keep it online? And what we've tended to say is whatever works for the individual. So if the individual wants to have their appointment online and that makes them feel less anxious, then let's do that. But if someone wants to come in and have that face-to-face interaction, then let's do that too. So it's really
Mhm.
letting the patient lead when they want to be online or when they want to be in person, if it's possible with the level of care that they're getting.
The
Not coming from, oh, that's fine, because it's still, yeah. Should we ask Yanni what her question?
Hi there. Nice to see you, Natasha.
Hi, Yanni.
And nice to meet you, Aaron. Thank you for the presentation. I want to ask your thoughts about a topic that we all don't like to talk about, and that's time and money. Because we all know, and most people here really value the work that we do, and very similar to you, inclusive research, working with people. But we know it, as you said in your presentation, it takes time figuring out how to work together, to co-create, co-design, and co-research together. And so I'm wondering the ways that you make the case and justify the time that's needed. When you're submitting grants, for example, so why we need more money and more time to be able to do the work. And if you're using certain references that are helpful, or how do you justify it? And then also maybe that's something, we can all collectively work on together, because sometimes you need like the citations that show that really provide the evidence when it comes down to time and money. So just wanted your comments on that, about how you're justifying the time and money to funders.
Are you okay for me to answer that, Aaron? So what we typically do is, in our grants, we'll say that we have a core team of citizen researchers that we work with, and we know from experience we need X amount of, they'll need X amount of hours to work on this, and this takes into consideration their support needs when they work. And that usually is received quite well. And then there's guidance of what citizen researchers should be paid. And we normally go a little bit above that, just because we know that, people, we really value the work that they do. And it's never come back as, this, we have an issue with this. It's actually quite well received, with just kind of bringing to life what the people that you're working with. And I know sometimes you don't have the citizen researchers, you don't have them at the start of the project, maybe you have them later on. So maybe it's harder to speak to gauge that. But I think because of the kind of partnerships that we've kind of developed over the last 5 to 7 years, that we have a nice sound rationale around that. Does that make sense, Yanni?
Yeah, definitely. I think, oh, go ahead, Aaron.
To me, a touching subject, as the government doesn't always allow the benefit, so it's harder to get paid, but there are a few loopholes by paying by gift cards. Yeah, so I guess speaking to some of our experience with payment, sometimes citizen researchers don't want to get paid because they don't want to mess up their benefits. So we'll say, how about a gift card? Can we give you a gift card? And they'll say, sometimes they'll accept that. Sometimes they're like, no, I don't want that. So it's like, what can we do to give something back to you? So, how can we help your CV? Is there a skill that we can help you learn so that you can take that to your next employment job or your next volunteer position? How can we make sure that we're still giving back? We unfortunately did have a case where someone accepted the payment, and the way she got paid, she then lost her benefits that month, which was not ideal, and it was just a mess. But yeah, so we're working with HR now to see how can we make sure that doesn't happen again. And I think HR didn't understand or didn't maybe take us seriously with what we were saying, that this will mess up her benefits, and they still paid her in a way that HR just pays everyone. And we said, no, this needs to come in in smaller amounts. So yeah, just a system. I think it's a beast that we're all trying to navigate and work in, but those are kind of the tips that things that have worked for us, right, Aaron?
Yeah, as Yona put in, the exact same issue here. And I agree with you, Aaron. Like we always have to make decisions and provide options, different options, and discuss what the implications or the consequences are. But one thing I was thinking, it's like we probably all somehow need to document like the time and money and write them into our papers that we can cite each other, like to help provide support when we're moving forward in other projects. But thank you very much. I'll let someone else ask a question.
Um,
Go ahead, Aideen.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Aideen. Thank you so much for this really powerful presentation, and it's so important. Thank you, Aaron and Natasha. I have a question about knowledge translation or mobilization, about next steps. And the work is so important, and the findings have been so important. How does this get disseminated now? First of all, looking at post-secondary education and adult education. How do we get other universities and so on, or even your own university, to embed this and use it? Are there any plans with this? First of all, in the education sector.
Shall I speak to that, Aaron? So because of the work that we have been doing together, the paper, the social inclusion paper, digital inclusion paper, that's actually been really beneficial for Get Together. So that's really supported their position as a charity for securing more funding, because funders really like the partnership, university community partnership. So that's been fantastic for that organization to secure future funding for the years to come to continue to do the great work that they're doing. We've also, I guess we've got a bit of a reputation throughout the country here of doing inclusive research in an impactful way. So that's actually led to other organizations reaching out to us to want to engage other individuals where people are, other care workers or organizations saying, I've got this really good person, I think they'd be really good. Could they come along? And absolutely yes. So that's been really nice. And most recently, we've got a new dean at the school, and she's really keen to get students with learning disabilities in the university. So we're in early talks of developing a health and social care program for people with learning disabilities to come in and get a university degree. So that'll be, and this is all from the work, using the stage that I was talking about to showcase that people with LD do deserve and have a right to be in university. So I know that's been a goal of Aaron's since he started working with us.
Thank you so much. Aaron, are you leading any groups with this? Or I'd love to hear a bit about your advocacy. Okay.
Maybe while Aaron's typing, if anyone else has a question, they can put it in the chat or raise their hands, just so I have a sense of how many more people want to comment.
Are you okay for me to read that, Aaron? My main topic is breaking down the stigma that people with learning disabilities face. And my next step is really to see how to prove that adults with intellectual disabilities do have capacity to make their own decisions.
Good for you.
So
thank you.
One thing we were chatting about before we sort of had our formal beginning is the importance. This talk is mostly to our research team, right? And people who are part of the research program, but we also have an advisory of folks with Developmental Disabilities.
Mm.
And they meet at a separate time. So we didn't open this talk to them, but it's actually a reminder for me actually that there's two groups, just like you have two sets of recommendations.
Mhm.
There's two groups or two audiences you need to be reaching, right? And so we came to one audience, the people at the hospital, which is like the people at the university, but the other audience would be, people who, have this experience themselves and want to get more involved or see how people could be involved. So one place to take the information would be potentially our advisory and sort of comparing experiences. And it's great to see that you would love that. Yeah, there's other groups as well that we're familiar with, and we're doing some of this work.
Mm.
Yeah, we could definitely go partner up and do like a round table. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Hannah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say I facilitate the self-advocate advisory, and that would be really great. It was really helpful and interesting to hear your presentation and to just hear like how your work with engagement is going, and just like it's really helpful for me to hear that. And just I'm really glad that you're doing the work you're doing.
The
Yes, our emails are on our PowerPoint, so reach out to us.
Great. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Okay. So any last words from our audience or from Aaron or Natasha?
Thank you for having us. It's been a lovely
Thank
chat.
you.
Yes. And I hope you all noticed Aaron's Scotland flag in the back that he put there this morning.
This is fabulous. Thank you so much.